a powerful voice from the Woodstock era has just gone silent. Country Joe McDonald, the legendary singer who once led hundreds of thousands of people in one of the most unforgettable protest songs in music history, has died at the age of 84. For many fans, his music wasn't just entertainment. It was a symbol of an entire generation speaking out against war and demanding change. When he stepped onto the stage at the historic Woodstock Festival in 1969, nearly 500,000 people watched as he performed the anti-war anthem that would define his legacy forever. Now, decades later, that iconic voice is gone. According to reports, Country Joe McDonald passed away on March 7th in Berkeley, California, after battling complications from Parkinson's disease. His death marks the end of an era in American music history. But the story of how he became the voice of a generation is something that still fascinates music fans today. And it all started long before Woodstock. Joseph Allen McDonald, known to the world as Country Joe McDonald, was born on January 1st, 1942. In Washington, D.C., he later grew up in California, where his early love for music began to take shape. Before becoming a famous musician, McDonald actually served in the United States Navy from 1959 to 1962. That experience would later influence many of his songs, especially his views about war and peace after leaving the military. He moved to Berkeley, California, during a time when the city was becoming a center of political activism and cultural change. The 1960s were a period when young people across America were questioning authority and protesting the Vietnam War. In 1965, McDonald co-founded a band with guitarist Barry the Fish Melton. The group became known as Country Joe and the Fish. Their music blended folk, rock, and psychedelic sounds. But what really made them stand out was their bold political message. The band quickly became one of the most influential acts in the San Francisco music scene. They performed at legendary venues like the Fillmore Auditorium and the Avalon Ballroom, where the psychedelic rock movement was growing rapidly. In 1967, they released their debut album, Electric Music for the Mind and Body. The album helped establish them as one of the key bands of the counterculture era. Later that same year, they released another album titled I-Feel-like-I'm-Fixin in single quotes -2-die, and it was from that album that one song would change everything. I-Feel-Like-I'm-Fixin to Die Rag quickly became one of the most recognizable anti-Vietnam War protest songs of the 1960s. The lyrics were sarcastic, bold, and openly critical of war. At a time when many artists avoided political controversy, Country Joe McDonald leaned directly into it, but the moment that made him a legend happened in the summer of 1969. That was the year of the historic Woodstock Festival. More than 400,000 people gathered in New York for what would become the most famous music festival in history. When Country Joe McDonald took the stage, he didn't just perform a song, he created a moment that would be remembered for decades. Standing alone with his guitar, he led the massive crowd in the famous Fish cheer before launching into I-Feel-Like-I'm-Fixin to Die Rag. The crowd joined him as thousands of voices echoed the unforgettable line, 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? That performance captured the spirit of the 1960s protest movement and became one of the most iconic scenes in rock history. The moment was later featured in the famous 1970 Woodstock documentary, ensuring that new generations would continue discovering his music. Country Joe and the Fish continued making music through the late 1960s and early 1970s, releasing several albums that helped shape the psychedelic rock movement. However, the band eventually disbanded in 1971. After the group split, McDonald continued his musical journey as a solo artist. Over the years, he released dozens of records and remained deeply committed to political and social causes. His music often highlighted issues like civil rights, environmental protection, and veteran support, Unlike many rock stars from that era, McDonald lived a relatively simple life. Friends often described him as thoughtful, passionate, and deeply connected to the causes he believed in. He spent many of his later years living in Berkeley, California, where he continued writing music and reflecting on his long career. Country. Joe McDonald was also a father of 5 children and is survived by his wife, Kathy. When news of his passing broke, many fans and music historians immediately began remembering his impact on culture and music, because Country Joe McDonald was never just a performer. He was a symbol of the counterculture movement that defined the late 1960s. His songs asked difficult questions about war, politics, and the role of young people in shaping the future. And during one of the most turbulent times in American history, his voice helped inspire millions to think differently about the world around them today. Even decades after Woodstock, his music continues to appear in documentaries, history books, and retrospectives about the cultural revolution of the 1960s. The stage may now be silent, but the message he shared through music still echoes through time. Country Joe McDonald may be gone, but the powerful moment he created at Woodstock and the songs that challenged an entire generation will continue to live on, because sometimes a musician becomes more than just an artist. Sometimes they become the voice of history.